Hey, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you guys joining from other parts of the world. Alex, thanks for joining me today. We've been experimenting with this format with so long, but it's funny because we were discussing that uh, you're like, I guess, the most well-known face on the Intelligems side because you're all over everyone's feeds on LinkedIn and on X on YouTube. So I'm excited to have you here and jam a bit about test ideation, ecom experimentation, and everything in between.
Dude, I'm excited. I was saying I'm usually the person asking the questions. I never am the one who's answering them. So excited to jam, and the music, the countdown. This is getting legit. I'm loving it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this is, if I'm not mistaken, and as you can tell, still struggling a bit with the format here. This is the right one. Boom. There you go. You're on the spot. I think this is the seventh or eighth week we do these live streams, and we'll keep going live every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, just to have this kind of like unscripted conversations about the things we care about the most, which is obviously driving growth through experimentation and making like sound decisions that are just not based on intuition but on actual data. It's like to stop guessing and start being confident about the decisions you're making. And yeah, there's value in my opinion in just going again live, talking to people and having these conversations. Of course, shout out to you because you've been going on with the Intelligems podcast for like a couple of years at this point, close to it, and like it's super well received. Like people love the format. So this is just like a companion and a different kind of like flavor of the same goal of getting people to grow through experimentation.
Love it. You're gassing me. You're gassing me up a lot here. I hope I live up to the expectations of everything you're talking about.
Awesome. So today's topic is actually around test ideation. And the reason why I really wanted to jam with you on this is because, I mean, you clearly have had a ton of conversations about this, and you've been kind of like witnessing, sometimes from the side, sometimes from within, how companies think about experimentation and why ideation is or it's not important in the first place. I have some strong opinions on that because during my career I have had phases where I think like test ideation is not something that's like super relevant to have because you might need to think more holistically, but you have such a strong background in terms of like just getting better at this. So before we get into the actual topic, I would love you to give us a brief overview of like your career trajectory, like you what you've been doing within the last decade and what got you to I guess have all these conversations that you have these days with mostly D2C ecom experimentation practitioners.
Cool. I always say that tell me about yourself is like the hardest question to answer. So I'll do my best. But yeah, been in the e-com space for about a decade now. So I got my start in this space with a company called Sweet Tooth, which is now Smile.io. So started in loyalty programs more than 10 years ago, ended up creating my own brand. It was a men's grooming brand called Spearhead, and was running that for a few years, and then did some retention consulting for D2C brands. So like, how do I keep my LTV high? How do I get customer retention up? And I've jumped between a few different kind of e-com SaaS players. But over the course of the last 10 years, just been trying to keep my relationships high with everyone in the D2C arena, and basically probably 3 to 4 times a day talking to someone who's listening here, someone in the space about what's going on, what's strategically important, what's keeping them up at night.
It's interesting because before we started this live discussion, you were mentioning like you're not necessarily running on test yourself like on stores, but you're somewhat super connected with it. And in my opinion, you have like stronger good point of views and experience about this than even like people doing the actual craft. So I'm really curious to understand your perspective about just the concept of like test ideation, the idea of just thinking of ways to just run better tests that eventually will turn into something that you will roll out just to make a business impact. How important it is to you to do ideation, and how I guess attached or connected it should be from like a more traditional product backlog. You have a product background, uh, and kind of like digging deeper in what I was mentioning before. One school of thought just says like you don't need to have a testing backlog, because your testing backlog is your product backlog, and you would just test the things that you're planning to build as a product team. What's your perspective on that? And assuming you will defend the idea of like having a testing backlog, like why, how it is different from a more traditional kind of like product backlog.
Yeah, so a lot of product people are going to hate me for saying this, but like even when I was leading product teams, it was never about like, hey, maintaining a backlog. I actually hate maintaining a backlog because a lot of times things just get on there and then it's like, we'll get to it when we get to it. I think you need to be a little bit more agile. You need to be a little bit more strategic than that. So a lot of people, like when they get started with Intelligems, the first question they're going to want to ask is, what should I test? How often should I be testing? And like you were alluding to that with, hey, how do I create a roadmap? How do I have like the next 3 weeks worth of tests ready to go? What am I going to run after this current test? And I don't really think that that's the best way to ideate on this, because that will keep you in this camp of like, hey, I need quick wins. I want to have things that are easy to set up. I want to have things that are easy to show value. I might only look at a single metric, like I'll scope it in on conversion rather than looking at things more holistically. So it's not really about like what to test or how many tests should I have. For me, it's more important to ask like, what's strategically important right now? What's keeping you up at night? What's a really important question we could be asking that we can go experiment or test to get more clarification on it? Or what's a really important decision that we need to make or we recently made? And how do we actually get more information about that? So I know there's probably a lot of, and Carlos, you and I have talked about this. Like, I am not a traditional CRO person. And like some people might hate me for saying this. And if you hate me for saying this, put it in the comments, flame me. But yeah, trying to keep a roadmap of like tests for the next 3 months or whatever is going to be really hard to do. And I would argue probably not the best use of your time.
Well, I mean, something that's kind of like undeniable along those lines is that it's just so unrealistic. Like, it's really hard to know what you will be testing 3 months from now. Like, the market changed, like the customer behavior might change, and obviously so many factors that just thinking that you can know what it's worth testing like down the road, like for over a long period of time, it's just sometimes just naive in my opinion, like, quite honestly. uh, Not to mention that your current test will in many cases dictate what you will be testing next, because you will be iterating and kind of like compounding those learnings that you're gathering.
1000%. Like one of my favorite lines is, if you were thinking big enough on what you ran an experiment on, a lot of times you probably aren't going to get an answer. You're just going to get 5 more questions that are worth testing. So like if you try to keep this backlog or like groomed roadmap for 3 months, you won't be agile enough to respond to what you're currently learning. And again, if you, instead of planning tests, if you test the plan, you're always going to be moving in directions that are important to the entire business. Like I had a recent conversation, we were talking about like CRO versus product, and like CRO specialists are kind of being put in this box. And I'm like, I hate that. Like people need to get out of this kind of like, hey, there's a UX change that we want to test, and like, how's that UX change going? And then on to the next UX change. If you think bigger, broader, more strategically about this, you can just ask important questions, validate important decisions, and like always be turning your next experiment, your next test into something that can have more impact, more exposure, more I don't even know what the word I'm looking for here is, but like across the business, instead of like unilaterally scope to like, I have control over this little sliver, I'm going to make sure that I do the best inside of that sliver. The way to evolve out of that is like, think bigger, think broader, think about like operational excellence across the D2C business rather than like, what can I do in my individual lane? That's where the really good experiments, the meaty experiments, are going to come from.
And speaking of that, like based in your experience and working with so many people in the field, and I'm particularly fascinated about the fact that you've been having these conversations like almost on a weekly basis for so long. So obviously you have like kind of like an interesting meta-analysis there in terms of like patterns and stuff. But how, like in terms of like, I guess the companies that are making a bigger impact through experimentation, how much time do you think they devote to the act of just ideating itself instead of just making ideation something that naturally happens in the process of doing kind of like everything else? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like how much, it's kind of like, hey, how much time do I want to spend planning and how much time do I want to spend doing? Um, there's kind of like my take on this, and then there's going to be like what I view as from the conversations what people are doing. So Carlos is going to know what I'm going to say here because it's the same kind of tactics we deploy here at Intelligems, where it's like the best way to get started is to get started. So hey, we were talking before, if I run a test and I don't get an answer to it, I just get more questions. It's like, I don't necessarily need to carve out a ton of ideation time to it. It's like, if I get moving, the ideas are going to start flowing more naturally. Where if I spend too much time ideating and not enough time testing and experimenting, I'm going to have this really solid plan. And then I'm going to go into this first experiment, learn something completely different, and that planning time is wasted. That said, you need to have a strong hypothesis around what you want to experiment with, or else you're just going to be testing junk. So like, yes, get started, but like make sure it is grounded in something. And a lot of the conversations I have is they want like a lot of ideation happens on what am I going to test next. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a separate conversation from like the ideation and the strategic planning that is happening at like a higher level. So like maybe quick story time here is like I was talking to a brand, God, this is a few months ago now, and they're like, hey, Alex, I want to test reducing the amount of flavors that are shown on a PDP. So they have like 6 different flavors, and they're like, I want to go down to just showing a single flavor, and I want to do another test that just has like a variety pack that you can grab. Cool, we could just go run that test. But what about asking why we're doing that? Hey, what's the hypothesis here around reducing the flavor count? We have that conversation. We start talking. It turns out they want to try reducing the flavor count because they have more flavors on their Shopify D2C side, and they have fewer flavors on Amazon. And they're looking at like the Amazon P&L versus the Shopify P&L and like noticing discrepancies. So it's like, okay, you don't actually just want to test like what will happen to conversion rate by dropping the amount of flavors that are on this PDP. There's a higher level thinking here around like, hey, Amazon is showing better retention, better repeat purchase. Is it because there's no flavor fatigue? Okay, now we're ideating around like, I have 2 different arms of my business, and like I want to test what's going on my D2C side, and like, can I make it more similar to Amazon? Should I? Does that matter? Like, you can ask why enough times where it will eventually get to a strategic business decision, which is like, hey, Amazon is great, but I have more control over the customer experience on my D2C site. So like, hey, how do I make more of like what is happening on Amazon happen in D2C? Okay, now we're not stuck on, hey, reducing flavor count on a PDP. We can open that up to 1,000,001 different experiments we could run to try to get to that answer. So your original question of like, how much time should be spent ideating? a ton of time should be spent ideating and strategizing on like what's important to the business. And if that's done effectively, then you're going to be able to put experiments in place to answer those questions and validate those decisions with a strong hypothesis rather than, hey, do I have the next 3 weeks or the next 3 months worth of experiments lined up and ready to go?
That's fascinating, and I'm very aligned with the angle there based on my own experience running like hundreds of experiments for DTC brands. But there's something that's also true, which is that especially when companies are starting out with experimentation, they just want to run tests like as many as possible and as soon as possible, so there's a nice tension there between all the business impact and how holistic you can get through experimentation and just launching next week's test. Like, actually, there are many agencies out there in the field that uh, scope their work based on a fixed number of tests per month, which is definitely a topic for different topic of conversation. But there's definitely perceived value in just testing volume and ideation volume. So how do you balance that out? Because I mean, clearly there's like the better you get at testing and the more often you test, the more you will uncover certain opportunities. Of course, you cannot just stay testing like irrelevant stuff like forever. But yeah, there's like some kind of balance to be kind of like found in that spectrum.
Yeah, I actually take like quite a bit of heat on this in the industry about like, hey, Alex, are you saying like don't run these smaller tests, like only take big swings, only take big bets? No, but like the industry for so long has been like do small change, and like keep it going. That like that's just kind of like the known about our space. So I'm not actually saying don't do those, but like you need to go try to find some of these higher, I don't know, higher order things, bigger bets that you can go experiment in. But that's not to say you shouldn't be running some of these smaller things. Like, should I be changing layouts? Should I be changing headlines? Should I be changing image and copy? Absolutely. You can find wins along the way. You're going to be able to find like 5% conversion bumps or a 1% profit bump in doing these things. And like, you should always be testing those. It's trying to like find some of those higher order ones. So like, I call this like on-page tests, beyond the page tests, and business level tests is changing the copy, changing an image. Like, those are usually scoped to like a page or a funnel. They click this ad, they end up on this landing page, and like, what can I get out of that? The impact that you're going to get out of that is scoped to that specific funnel. Now, if you're running millions of dollars in advertising into that one funnel, that can potentially be like a really big impact. But if you start to go beyond the page and start testing on things that, or levers that are across the site, where it's like, what is my overall offer? How am I going to gamify building AOV? Is it with free shipping thresholds or free gifts on different thresholds? These are things that you can start to experiment with that aren't necessarily scoped to like that one funnel that's coming in or that one page. It's like, hey, anyone who comes to the site, whether that's through organic traffic, whether that's through email. And again, you can like scope to these specific channels and run experiments for those. And when I say like, oh, go experiment with something like at the business level, you can start to think of some like really big things like, hey, I want to switch over my live chat support that's on the site to AI chat support. Okay, run that as an experiment. Have it on one group and not on the other. And like, what does that do to conversion? What does it do to AOV, to profit? That's something that's like now at the business level. Or, hey, I'm thinking about adding a new flavor to my rotation. My hypothesis is if I add a new flavor, that it is going to add incremental revenue to my business. But maybe it won't. Maybe it's just going to move people from existing flavors to that new flavor, and it doesn't actually do anything for you. So like, that's what can be tested at the business side. So you need to have, when you're ideating, you need to have ideas that are inside all three of these buckets. The ones that are on like the higher level, that are bigger broader, more impactful, like you obviously can't have a ton of those going at the same time. So it's like, hey, have one of these bigger bets. It's like filling, like there's an old product saying where it's like big rock in a jar, fill with pebbles around that, and then fill the remainder with sand. Yeah, that exactly. 100%, Paul.
Yeah, I'm still not quite sure if those show up, but our friend Paul Randall just said, spread your betting so you're able to balance a portfolio, which is essentially a nice way to frame what you're describing, which is don't stop paying attention to I guess, let's say the small stuff just for the sake of this conversation. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't mean it's a small in the scope of like potential business impact, but it's like, in a way, it's like the way I see it, and we could totally disagree here, is like you need to put that on some kind of like autopilot. You need to let sometimes just AI handle it. Sometimes just make it more autonomous in a way, so that you can spend the time in those other things that could also move the needle. And if they do, the impact will be more like exponential. So I know you didn't necessarily want to talk about this, but I really want you to plug this AI audit mechanism that we were recently discussing and talking about, because I'm pretty sure some of our viewers will be interested on it.
Yeah. So the focus of
And
this has
and
been like, hey, go
real
ahead.
quick, Alex, before you go ahead, also the why. I mean, the why is it's probably more important than the what in this case.
Yeah, and like the whole purpose of this episode has been like, hey, how do I come up with ideas? And when we talk about ideating versus going, like sometimes you're stuck, right? Like sometimes it's I don't know what I should be experimenting with, and like I would love for someone to give me ideas or tell me where I should be going. So if you go to intelligems.io/audit, we basically put an AI audit together that's going to just put in a URL, pick a goal, and give you some ideas that are worth testing. So it's going to give you 3 ideas to test. Again, it's only based off the URL and what we can see on the store. If you want to go deeper in this, like come talk to Intelligems, we'll actually look at your store data and like create hypotheses and ideas around what's actually happening in your business. But it's a fantastic place to start, right? 3 ideas that you could potentially go test. Inside of that audit, you're also going to get some questions that are worth validating or pursuing. So like questions around, like good questions to answer are like, what would happen if I increased my prices by 15%? What would happen if I decreased my prices by 15%? You're never going to know unless you experiment to figure it out. So intelligems.io/audit, great way to get kind of like 3 ideas that you can go try right now. If you're stuck, if you're looking for other inspiration, great way to go get it.
Yeah, one additional kind of like shout out on that on my end is that I like the framing on how this is not really just about like the surface level type of stuff. Sometimes it's I mean, people need to put what their goals are as a business, because obviously at this point we all know that it's not only about just having more conversions, which has been like kind of like the conversation for so long. And also that, yeah, this is kind of like approach from a more financial perspective in a way, where it's like, hey, if we were to think about your business and your P&L, these are some things that would be worth testing. So yeah, shout out to the team who built this, because I'm finding it really valuable. Of course, keep iterating on that. It's a never ending process. But frankly, I think we're heading into that direction in many ways, in many fronts. Like obviously, AI is here to stay, and we just see really amazing use cases of how people use it. So it, like as I said, like on a couple of sessions before, like maybe 3 years ago, we used to joke that like like a single person couldn't run an experimentation program. And we used to joke when we would see those like job listing of like a CRO manager that were supposed to do like design and development and ideation and everything, and it was like that was nuts. Well, I think it's no longer that crazy. Like with the right tools, like you can run a solid experimentation program as a solo person, which is quite fascinating to witness.
Yeah, I think like the dawn of like the AI enabled operator is here. Like, hey, we're talking about ideation here. When you can build, like, I'm seeing a ton of people be like, oh, I'm going to vibe code something in Lovable or Replit and then add it to Shopify and experiment with something. Like, AI is making it super easy to kind of build whatever you want. Like, the limiting factor is no longer can I build it? Like, we're getting to a point where like the answer to can I build it is almost always going to be yes. The tougher thing here as we go into this like age of AI, and like what I'm really excited about with Intelligems is not like, hey, can it be built? It's should it be built? And when it is built, did it work? So when there is infinite possibility, the limiting factor now should be what is actually worth doing? Because the answer to can I do it is yes. So it's now should I do it? And then when I choose to do it, did it work? Hey, I vibe coded something, something went up there, like changes are happening. Was it an effective change? And by running it as like a test or at least a personalization that you can measure, you're going to be able to actually answer that. And I think like AI and this AI enabled operator is like, hey, have AI help me understand the realities of my business, help me ideate on what's possible, and like help me find some of those bigger tests, but also help me like put together a quote roadmap of the smaller stuff so that I can keep moving in the right direction. And then, hey, I want like AI to help me analyze what's going on here. Because again, like, are we at a point where it like gets rid of everyone? No, it's an AI enabled operator. You're going to be able to like augment people on the team in a faster way. So you can do more of these things, understand more of these things to get to winning outcomes. And like you said earlier, it's not necessarily about like, hey, conversion rate bumps, but actually looking at the P&L here. Like, hey, at the end of the day, if you work at a D2C brand, you are trying to grow the business. You are trying to be a more profitable business. You're trying to get more revenue. You're not necessarily trying to get more conversions. If you do it the right way, the conversions are going to help you achieve that goal. But hey, what are some of those things that are like going to boost my margins, going to increase my profitability, not just, hey, how do I target conversion rate bumps?
Yeah, just a reflection at the end on that. Like, I mean, you definitely touch base on something that's changing the game in a way, which is that with AI and with tools like Cloud Code and Cursor and many others, like the time to build like treatments or variants has been just reduced like dramatically. So again, the reflection here is around whether like you need to have just a testing backlog when you can really have we really have the ability to build the actual like feature or change or whatever you're introducing almost with production ready code. Obviously, I want to be very respectful about the work that developers do, because I'm aware that this is not necessarily the actual case, but we're getting closer and closer to that. So sometimes, if we just bring this back to the Shopify ecosystem, you can just build a feature. So it's no longer just a test idea; it's a feature that you just happen to test before rolling out. But my reflection with all of this, based on what I've been kind of like witnessing within the last couple of years, is that the idea of just having an isolated in an echo chamber kind of like testing backlog is getting outdated in a way, because it's just kind of like not needed anymore.
Also, like plug for Carlos, you have a webinar coming up talking about like the relationship between paid media and on-site testing. Is like there this echo chamber, or like I've called it like this like unilateral view, is again ideating and trying to create this roadmap of like things that I'm going to test in my world. If I had to sum up what I'm actually saying, it's like if you're going to be experimenting, and like changes are going to happen on the site and in the business every single day, whether you are testing them or not, they are happening. So it's like, hey, if you can expand the rails out so that I'm not so unilaterally focused, I can start to find these bigger things. But as you do that, there's people who are on the paid media team. There are people who are like operating in retail and Amazon that have like these questions and like these, I don't know, decisions to go validate. If you are a person who is experimentation oriented and you are able to, again, test hypotheses, read into the data, and like tell people how things are going, you don't need to sit in a single lane. You can start to have impact across the business. You just need to make sure that you're having those conversations with other people in the business, not like, hey, I work in my lane. And like, again, when Paul was saying like, hey, the ratio here, the small stuff's easy to do and you can keep your plate very full by doing the small stuff because you don't need to get approval from someone else. Another team doesn't need to know what's going on. But like that will keep you in the small stuff. So get into some of these bigger conversations, work across the teams. And again, figuring out what is worth doing is like the new frontier of e-com, of D2C. The limiting factor is not the build. It's should I do this and did it work?
Love that. Alex, thanks so much for joining me today. We'll definitely have you back at some point soon. Obviously, for those who don't know, Alex also leads our Intelligems podcast, who's usually live on YouTube every week, more or less. Is that accurate?
Every Monday, head over to go on YouTube, search Intelligems or Intelligams. New episode every Monday.
Nice. And I'm very opinionated about keeping these live streams, as I always say, like short and sweet. So try to keep them under 30 minutes so that like people can continue with their day. So thanks so much for joining me today, Alex. Thanks also to Vanessa and Paul, our friend Shiva, who chime in with comments. We love the engagement here, and we'll see you guys next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So with that, just Alex, once again, thank you so much. And yeah, just want to hear your final remarks before we just conclude for the day.
Ask important questions, use experimentation and testing to get you the answer or another question. If you do that, you'll always be ideating the right way.
Love it. Thanks so much. And thanks, everyone.